DraftKings and FanDuel do not make money on people who are good at gambling. They make money on folks who they know are going to lose a lot of money and can't help themselves and keep coming back. Satan is really cunning and he's really smart. He doesn't come at us with horns and pitchforks and looking scary. He rides on the back of things that are good and wholesome, like sports. And he will come in there and take what is wholesome and good and twist it like he does with everything else. And so we have to just warn our young people and saying that these are vices and behaviors you want to be very wary of. You want to be very cautious about because they have the potential to really destroy families.
Hit 'em with a little bit of dopamine to keep 'em looking every second. They'll be second guessing, trying to meet the expectation of the age of information. The simulation will be so convincing they'll forget that they're alive.
Yeah, so name is Daniel Darling. I'm the director of the Land Center for Cultural Engagement here at Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary in Fort Worth. I'm a columnist for World Magazine. I contribute to a few other publications, Gospel Coalition, National Review, USA Today, other places like that. And I've written a few books. My latest book is In Defense of Christian Patriotism, helping Christians really think through what does it look like to steward our citizenship as a Christian or American citizenship. Let's see. I pastored before. I was senior pastor for about 6 years in the Chicago area. I've been associate pastor for a while, and then I've served in various executive positions, in the Southern Baptist Convention and other Christian parachurch nonprofit organizations. Now I'm teaching, which I'm enjoying. Got a wife and 4 kids. So been married for 23 years. Got 3 girls and a boy. My oldest is 21. My youngest is 14. So we got a bunch of teenagers. So it's a fun full house right here.
Oh yeah, for sure. And Dan, glad to have you back on the podcast. And to our listeners, we have Kurt Cooper here as well. Kurt, you want to give a brief bio as well?
Sure. My name's Kurt Cooper. I minister in Montgomery, Alabama at Trinity Presbyterian Church. I was a youth minister for more than 2 decades, and a youth minister at this church for almost 13 years before I took the call to be the senior pastor. And I have never written an article for anything, and will never be, more than likely will never be asked to write an article for anything. If World Magazine or National Review ever develops a comic strip, I could possibly be involved, but other than that, maybe not. So,
well,
and I have 2 children. I was so excited to hear that Daniel's 4 kids. He does not look old enough, and I'm not trying to flatter you, that to have a 21-year-old. When he said his oldest was 21, I took a deep breath. My oldest is 14. I have 2 sons, 14-year-old and an 8-year-old. And my wife Marty, and we live here in Montgomery. So that's us.
Awesome.
Yeah, and thanks to the 2 of you for coming on today. Looking forward to having our conversation. As anyone's been tuning in this season, they know that we're talking about dopamine. That's big picture, but today we're zooming in on sports betting and specifically how it ties into dopamine. Some of that will kind of remain in the background as we talk about just areas related to sports betting. And I kind of thought too, as we're going to be talking about this issue that, as a sobering issue can be a bit more negative. Let's begin with maybe some positive talk about sports. We're all sports fans. We enjoy sports. Dan, I recently read an article that you wrote, talking about the U.S. Olympic hockey teams and winning gold medals. And I'll say after reading that, I went and I watched both of those kind of the scoring goals and just sitting there, getting tears in my eyes, like chills from that. And so maybe, talk about that a little bit and also tie into your book that you mentioned, your new book, just a minute ago.
Well, appreciate that. Yeah. I mean, I love sports and I think it's one of the things that can bring people together. I think it's great for a number of reasons. I mean, I played sports growing up and played played basketball in high school and college. Just the team aspect, having a coach like pull more out of you than you think you can do. Everyone together for one goal, that kind of thing, is really good. I mean, Paul talks about it quite often in the New Testament and uses sports as a metaphor. And I love following sports. I mean, I'm a Chicago sports fan. I was born and raised in the northwest suburbs of Chicago. And so, this last year, my son and I were really big NFL fans, and we watched the Chicago Bears, and they had a great season. They had some like 7 comeback wins, including a comeback win against the Green Bay Packers in the playoffs in overtime, which is like, I don't care what happens after this. This is the greatest thing. It was so awesome. And, it's just so much fun and joy to watch people who at their peak of performance and all the dedication they put into it. So I think sports is good. And this is one of the reasons I'm really concerned is we're going to talk about sports gambling that, you've always had sports gambling in America. So I don't want to act as if this is something new, but I just think the increased, legality of it, how widespread it is, how sanctioned it is by, the major sporting bodies and the states increasingly, really I think is hurting sports. It's putting pressure on athletes to be and do things that they can't do. It's, and I also think it's trapping a lot of young men into some really bad habits that will carry with them most of their lives. The people that own the casinos, as I tell my kids all the time, their goal is not for you to get rich. Their goal is for them to get rich. And we actually, on our vacation last year, we were driving all through the West, and we stopped in Las Vegas. And I said, look at all these buildings, guys. Like, how do you think these buildings were built? Well, they're built on the backs of people who lost money. And I just think it's a real bad thing, particularly the way it targets young men with the internet and the algorithms and everything. I'm just really concerned about it.
Well, yeah, maybe you might have just answered this, but I know really, I credit you for kind of raising awareness in my own life about this when I read or either heard you on The World and Everything in it, or either it was an article through World, one of those avenues. But what was it about this issue that really just moved you to write something about this and start being so outspoken on this?
Well, I think part of it is just, concern about things that prey on young men. I have a son, a 17-year-old son. And I think increasingly, the thing about, I think there's a couple motivations. One, I'm a huge sports fan, so I'm listening to podcasts. I'm watching sports shows on TV, watching games, and you just can't escape the advertising for it. And even a lot of my favorite sports pundits and announcers are, hawking the betting apps and everything like that. And you're just surrounded by it. It really makes me concerned for people who, for a lot of folks who are going to be trapped in a cycle of addiction and dependency. And I also think when the whenever society legalizes a certain vice, and there's a debate about what should be legal, what shouldn't be, but whenever it legalizes a vice, it's always the lower classes that suffer. The upper classes, the elite classes, whether it's marijuana, whether it's gambling, whether it's a redefinition of the family, the elite classes have the resources and the wherewithal to sustain the negative fallout from those vices, right? They can pay for rehab. They have thicker communities and all that kind of stuff. It's the working class and lower classes that's always affected. And, these folks that are advertising sports betting, the athletes and the sportscasters, well, they're wealthy and they probably have a big line item in their budget for it. But the industry depends on people who are so desperate and so addicted that they're betting their paycheck. And there's real harms here. There's a lot of studies that show it disproportionately hurts low-income folks. You have a lot of families that'll be ripped apart. families destroyed. It increases social services in some of these communities. So I really think we need to pay attention to it. And I'm really particularly concerned about the intersection of gambling and technology, because now a lot of young men have a phone in their pocket and their dad's credit card, and they can get into some serious trouble early in life. And I think it's something that we should pay attention to.
Mm. Yeah, let me just throw out this stat, and then Kurt, I'd love for you to jump in. I saw one estimate that it's a $19.6 billion industry, kind of estimate for 2026.
Mhm.
That's just how significantly this is growing. $19.6 billion. Kurt, love for you to jump in.
Well, one, I would agree with everything that Daniel said. Um, this is a big, big pastoral issue. I think it's important for us to say some things off because I listen to a lot of sports podcasts and sports reporting or read reporters too, and almost every one of them has a very cozy relationship with DraftKings or FanDuel or any of these other MGM, all these different casinos or I mean that's what they are is casinos. Is the first thing is that it's not fair. Is that online gambling is not fair. It is predatory. And I think it's important to say that these are predatory industries. We should look at them the same way that we look at, the payday loan places that only show up in, as Daniel mentioned, the impoverished neighborhoods. Because the truth of the matter is that these gambling sites, they push their least successful for the gambler kind of bets on bettors. A thing called a parlay, which is when you string multiple bets together, like the Cowboys to win and Dak Prescott to throw for 300 yards and for CeeDee Lamb to catch 2 touchdowns. And if all those things happen, then there's this immense payout happening. But guess what? And I've listened to enough podcasts, even though I don't gamble myself, to know I've listened to gamblers say, like, hitting 2 of 3 legs on a parlay or 3 or 4 legs on a parlay is basically par for the course. That's what's going to happen. One of those things is not going to happen, but they push these things over and over again. And and on top of that, and I've read so many articles about this because I've been wanting to teach like a Sunday school class on this. But on top of that, if by some chance you are successful in betting, which it's a very low chance that you will be, but almost the same kind of chance of you being a professional athlete.
Right.
But if by some chance you are successful, then they limit the amount of money that you can wager. So they are not set up for the game. The game is rigged. And I would say I have a lot of thoughts on this. So I was really thankful that John asked me to join in. But I would say one of the worst parts of gambling is that it calls into question every kind of controversial thing that happens in a game. Now, every time something happens, you have to ask the question, well, did someone get to him? Right? Someone makes a perplexing play. I think about, do y'all remember the British Open when that guy Van de Velde this has been a long time ago, but some French golfer on the last hole of the British Open shoots like a 9. He's in the lead and he shoots like a 9. He hits it into the water and then he can't get out and all this bad things happen. And if that were to happen today, people would be like, well, were they paying him to do that? Right. And I think that's really one of the sad things about it, is because there is something great about sports, about people like trying their hardest. And when you start to call that into question, right, it really does rob some of the joy. The Bears, they lost. I can't remember who beat them. Maybe the Rams beat them in the playoffs or whatever, and it was a close game. But now people have to ask, like, if there was I don't remember if there was a drop or not, but it's like if there was a drop, it's like, well, what about that receiver? And I think that's kind of a sad part of it too.
And something too, and I want Dan to jump in just to interject. I heard Andrew Noble, who's been on this podcast as well. He said that some of these betting apps, to your point earlier about it's rigged so you're not going to do well, that if you do too well, you get banned from the app. that it
Yeah.
actually kicks you off of it. So
That's
if you
right.
start to win, because there are some people who do kind of know the system and know how to bet and do certain things, and if you're too good at it, you're going to get kicked off anyway.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Dan, I know
that's
you were.
exactly right. And there's a lot of studies that show, and some of them have actually admitted that their whole business model depends on problem gamblers or degenerate gamblers that actually have an addiction, actually have a problem, that the industry depends on those people. Um, and like you said, Kurt, you're exactly right. It taints the game. We've already had college students suspended or banned because they're working with the gambling industry, or maybe they've um, thrown a game or something like that. We had an NBA coach and player that's being investigated by the FBI because you have these prop bets where you bet, is this guy gonna have this many points, or the over under how many points? And it's funny, it happens in these meaningless games like in the NBA that people aren't paying attention to. And if you're a rookie, say in the NBA, and you're not, you're making the rookie pay scale, and someone comes along and says, "Hey, will you work with me?" You have to be a real person of integrity to say no, even though it's illegal according to the rules. I mean, so you're going to see a lot of that stuff. It just calls into question the integrity of the sport. And I've also read about athletes where they don't score a touchdown, or they don't have enough points, and people are giving them death threats, or people saying online, even though their team won the game,
Mm-hmm.
they're mad because I bet that you were going to have 3 touchdowns, you only had 2, or I had money on you scoring 35 points in a game and you only had 23 or something like that.
Or
And
Daniel, to jump in, like sometimes in a football game, it will be advantageous for a running back or someone running the ball to just drop down on the 1 or 2 yard line to end the game
yes,
instead of scoring, which is he's doing what he should do to win, but you have him receiving death threats from fans of his team because they were betting on him getting that touchdown, right?
yeah. Or
Yeah.
even the injury reports. I keep hearing these commentators say, well, the NFL needs to be more transparent with their injury reports, which may or may not be a good thing. But the reason they're saying is, well, a lot of people have money on these games, and it's like,
Mhm.
these are human beings playing sports. These are human beings. They're not objects. They're not commodified people. They're not ATMs. So I really think it's a real problem. I think it's hard, and I'd love to hear what you guys think. This is an issue that is less clear cut from scripture than, say, sexual ethics,
Mm.
where you can't find whole passages say thou shalt not use DraftKings or whatever. But I do really feel strongly that if you look at the whole of scripture and what scripture warns against and some of the vices and behaviors, I really think it's hard to justify some of these gambling activities for a Christian. I really
Mm.
do. And I'm curious to hear what you folks say. And just because the Bible doesn't specifically mention it doesn't mean it's right to do and it's appropriate to do.
Well, yeah, I mean, you're all over the target right here, but you know, the Bible has the scriptures have a ton to say about how we manage the blessings that God has given us.
That's
They're
right.
so, and to be able to to throw away money on, and you could say, I would listen to the argument that someone says, I have this money and this is a way I entertain myself. This is no different than going on a vacation. Okay. Even then, right? To have that money and to just and to put it toward this when you say by your confession and your membership of a church that you want to fuel the expansion of God's kingdom in the world, you're going to have to do some pretty big moral and mental gymnastics to justify taking that money and throwing it away on this like pure
Yeah.
luxury at the the very definition of luxury versus helping, and I'm not even talking about tithing here. I mean, even taking that money and giving it toward your local soup kitchen.
Yeah,
Are you
that's
trying
right.
to pursue good?
That's
Mm-hmm.
exactly right. And Proverbs and other places warn against ill-gotten gain.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, it's one thing to say, here's our entertainment budget. We're going to go watch a movie, or we're going to play miniature golf, or we're going to, you know, you are paying, it's in the marketplace. You are paying money, but you're receiving something in return. You know, receiving, you know, whether you're watching a movie or going to comedian or going to a concert, you're receiving someone's gifts in return, or say miniature golf or something, you're receiving something in return. With gambling, it's really, you're really not receiving anything, and you have to, you know, it's cultivating the wrong character traits, greed and covetousness, without really, you know, the ideal thing is we spend our money in God's world. We use our resources and we get something from someone else. Someone else uses their gifts to cultivate the earth, and we purchase it, and it's a good exchange, or vice versa. This is different. And people have compared to the stock market. What's the difference between putting money in the stock market? Well, the difference here is that when you invest your money in the stock market, you are investing in actual real goods and things and companies. You're saying, I want to invest in this company that's doing actual things, whether they're making materials or they're financial services or whatever. Now, there is a form of risky Wall Street behavior that can be like a form of gambling that is probably ill-advised, but it's really not a one-to-one, right? Your 401k is in the stock market. You're investing in companies. You're investing in something real, you know?
And like you said, there's a product, right?
Yes.
When you invest in McDonald's, now whatever you think of McDonald's, they are producing something, right? Right. And your investment in them, day trading, sure, which you kind of mentioned, that is in some ways a lot like gambling. It's very speculative, but there is no net production in gambling. And like you've already mentioned this before, but I just say it again, the word that should be used to describe these apps is predatory. Because if you took away, and they're forced to advertise for all these gambling help centers, in all these podcasts and all these shows, they'll have at the end, every state seems to have one, but they're forced to do that. But if they were really serious about that, and they were really serious about getting rid of gambling, people who have a problem with gambling, they would lose all their profit. It wouldn't be a sustainable business model. They build their, you've already said this, Daniel, but they build their entire business off the backs of people who can't afford to do it. And you can read article after article after article about this. I was just looking through my bookmarks, and I have 5 different articles talking about men or women who, you know, because this is a vice that plays upon something that everyone loves, which is being right and having insider knowledge. Like, I see something that the book doesn't see, right? I know something. It preys upon that kind of self-idolatry of like, I can figure it out. You know, there are, like I said, article after article of guys who have a secret credit card and have racked up hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt, and they just, you know, kept going, trying to make it back, and couldn't. And some of them, their entire family and life is ruined. Others, you know, their family they were able to bring it back, but at a great cost. So it's a very predatory industry, and that's
really
what
is.
me. And you know, just like pornography, you know, targets young men, and young women, but specifically targets young men. This is what concerns me, because I was in youth ministry and I was noticing that my older students were talking in gambling terms a lot, and I picked up on it. And like I said, I listen to all these podcasts, so I know. I have had to make all my money, so I'm not a big gambler. I'm also only child, first child, very careful. Nothing about gambling is attractive to me. I'll just tell you that right now. I assume everyone knows more about sports than I do. And I could never get an inside track on anything. You could come down and tell me who was going to win. Like, God could come down and tell me who's going to win the game, and I would doubt it. But these guys, like you said, they're spending their father's money, right? This is how they start. They get on like a debit card or a credit card of their father's, and they get on one of these apps. They're supposed to have age verification. A lot of them, it's very thin. You can get through it. and they get hooked on it. And it becomes that dopamine that John mentioned at the beginning, it becomes a regular thing. And I've heard high school kids say this. Kids that I heard a kid, doesn't go to our church. I'm obviously not going to say his name, but he doesn't go to our church, but he's come to some things we did. And when he was in high school, he reffed children's basketball games.
Mm.
That's what he did on the side. And he didn't get paid very much for it, but he reffed. And they said, "Did you ref yesterday?" And he goes, "Yeah, but I already lost my whole paycheck," because he had already taken his whole paycheck and he had spent it on gambling, on DraftKings or FanDuel or whatever it is.
Well, when you look at the numbers too, and there's been a lot of articles even in like secular publications. So this is not like, oh, you're just a bunch of fundamentalists, in my case, Baptists that don't want to have any fun. There's been a lot of secular publications. The Atlantic came out with this is a year or two ago, and others that are doing studies to show the impact of it.
Hey there, this is Brent Corbin, Executive Director for RYM. Thank you so much for joining us on this season of the RYM podcast as we explore the effects of the God-given gift of dopamine on all of our lives in this technological age. Our podcast is just part of our array of resources which we provide to the church and parents in the church and anyone seeking to invest in the lives of young people. So head over to rym.org/resources to see what we have for you there. And our resources are themselves just a part of our array of offerings for the church. We also offer summer youth conferences. This summer we will have 9 conferences from coast to coast where churches can bring their youth students and youth groups, and they can learn alongside one another with over 15 hours of biblical instruction, interaction, as well as some serious fun along the way. We even have some openings this summer, so head over to rym.org/conferences to learn more about those. And if you or someone you know is looking to develop in your skills and understanding of how to think critically and effectively about how to minister to and care for youth, then you'll want to check out our RYM training initiatives to see if there's something there for you. So whether you're brand new in youth ministry or you've been in the game a long time as a minister or as a parent or a volunteer, we suspect there will be many ways for you to benefit from our decades of combined wisdom and experience in this space. So head over to rym.org/training to learn more there. As you've heard, our website is full of information that we hope is useful for you and for your church. So head over to rym.org, and if you'll scroll down to the bottom of that homepage and sign up for one of our newsletters that's applicable to you, you'll stay up to date on the latest of all that we have to offer. Now back to the show.
It's always associated with higher rates of mental illness, bankruptcy, domestic violence, crime, family breakdown. And a lot of our governments are chasing gambling dollars to think we're going to increase gambling and use all that money to go to education. Well, where is that money pulling from, right? That money is dependent on everybody losing. It's just a fundamentally broken way of thinking about revenue versus when you bring industry to a state or a country where people are producing good things for the community, for their neighbor, right? When you work and you build a product or you serve in some way, let's say you're a lawyer or a plumber or a doctor and you serve, there's an actual service that's benefiting someone and they're giving you money in return. Or if you're making furniture or cars or whatever, well, this is a whole different thing that you're squeezing people's money based on chance, out of them in order to support things. And so, I really think Christians should be wary of involvement in here. And I don't know about you, but I find among Christians, this is an area where people are surprised that you think it's wrong as a Christian. There's not a ton of consensus. I'm saying good conservative Bible-believing people are just like, oh, that's not, you don't think that's a good idea. And so I just think we need more teaching and training on this to help people be wise with their choices.
Well, before John jumps in, I do want to say one thing, and I'd love to hear his thoughts on this. But do you think that online sports gambling is kind of like the 2.0 version of the lottery? Now, the lottery, states that have lotteries, a lottery is a tax, as someone once told me, a lottery is a tax on people who aren't good at math.
Mm-hmm.
And it specifically targets lower income people in poverty.
Yeah.
And the excuse for it is the very excuse that Daniel just mentioned, which is education. The difference is that with online sports gambling, whereas with lottery, the luck is right out in the open, right?
Mm-hmm.
With the lottery, everyone understands you're not going to win the lottery. Everyone understands that. They still play it, or I guess they should understand it, but they still play it. But the tricky little lie of sports gambling is that you can believe that you have a real chance. You believe that you have a chance to win. And so people who normally would stay away from something as, dare I say, low class as the lottery. If you play the lottery, you shouldn't. Okay. And if that bothers you, you can at me later. I'm not on any social media, so good luck trying. But But, I think a lot of people who would say, I would never play the lottery, they are enticed by this because, again, it feeds their ego, whereas the lottery doesn't. John?
Well, and something too that I think we need to say, we're talking a lot about money, and that is a major aspect to what we're talking about. But I heard someone say sports betting isn't a money problem, it's a brain problem. And we've talked a lot about addiction associated with this. We've talked about dopamine. And so maybe let's talk about this. There was a time when, people would gamble on certain sporting events, but now with the birth of the smartphone and all these apps we're talking about, we know the smartphone by itself is designed with all sorts of addictive tendencies. Now you're taking something like sports betting, which is already addictive, and in a sense, we're just pouring fuel on it to make it that much more. So maybe Daniel, speak to that a little bit of just how this has changed kind of the landscape of sports betting, having it now through apps and things like that.
Yeah, I think there's less friction, right? And with vices and however you feel about how we should govern these things, I'm not a libertarian, so I think there are you can make a case for certain laws against certain vices. I'm not a socialist either, so I'm a conservative, so I do think you can have laws against certain vices for the good of the country, and we do, right? But whenever you reduce friction between people and vices, it just gets worse, right? So if you think before the advent of the smartphone, before sports betting was legalized, people did sports betting, but it was harder to do. You had to go to the, my grandmother would go to, and my grandfather would go to the racetrack, and sadly, sometimes they would blow their whole check, and my dad had to work to pay for that, and his family, he saw that firsthand. But there was a lot of friction to be able to get there. Now you have, everyone has a phone. The apps are constantly advertised, and they're ubiquitous. And, most kids have access in some way to their parents' credit card or something like that. Or if you're an adult, it's so easy. We know how easy it is to shop online for things that are wholesome and good that can get out of hand, right? How easy is it? Oh, I need something. Let me go on Amazon. Boom, it's here in, a day, or Walmart Plus, and it's here in 3 hours or something like that. And these are things that actually we need, sometimes, or don't always need. Sometimes on Instagram, there's a shirt or something like, oh, that looks nice. How easy is it? Think about that for sports betting. And, these companies are leveraging this technology, these algorithms, to maximize profits. DraftKings, FanDuel, they want to maximize profits, and they will tweak that algorithm until it can squeeze as much money as it can. And they don't really have a concern for the lives that are ruining. I mean, they will give you all the disclaimers when you listen to the advertisements. If you have a problem, call this number, call that number, which is really telling that you have to do that as you're advertising something. So they're maximized. Look, DraftKings and FanDuel do not make money on people who are good at gambling. They don't make money on professionals. They make money on folks who they know are going to lose a lot of money and can't help themselves and keep coming back. And I just think it's tragic. As Christians, we have to be wise about it. We have to warn people about these kinds of things. That I look at it as something that can entangle our souls. Scripture talks about the sins that easily beset us, the sins that can put deep roots in us and entangle us and entrap us and imprison us. And we want to warn those who are vulnerable against this. And Satan is really cunning and he's really smart. He doesn't come at us with horns and pitchforks and looking scary. He rides on the back of things that are good and wholesome, like sports. And he will come in there and take what is wholesome and good and twist it like he does with everything else. And so we have to just warn our young people, warn our people. I think we need to be more courageous in talking about this in the pulpit and saying that these are vices and behaviors you want to be very wary of. You want to be very cautious about because they have the potential to really destroy families.
Mm. I was just thinking, we're talking about how it changed from being on the phone to being, you used to have to go to some place somewhat seedy, not all,
Mm-hmm.
no, you had to go to a place somewhat, or know someone's uncle or something, to find a book, like someone who kept a sports book. And again, this reminds me a lot of how pornography changed in the late in the 2000s and the 2010s, which was you used to have to go to some convenience store or some place where they had a Playboy magazine or whatever it is, and they were hidden behind something. You had to go find it. Well, it goes and finds you. And now pornography does. Well, the same thing with gambling, actually, because if you get these apps on your phone, they pay attention to how often you use it and when you're prone to use it. And they will actually, what I'm told is they'll actually buzz your phone at different times, say, hey, you haven't bet in a while. Like, here's some extra money to, like, I guess, to add on to your next bet that you make. So they're purposely, trying to draw people. If you say no, if you just don't open the app for a while, they'll purposely try to draw you back in to this behavior that clearly you have trouble controlling.
Now, I know we're talking a lot about young men too in this conversation. Why do you think it's more aimed towards men? I mean, I know for the longest time we kind of would assume pornography that was just a male issue. Now we know that's not accurate, that it's a male and female issue. This issue does seem to be so focused on young men. Why is that?
I have two. Before the expert talks, the non-expert will say something. The first is risk taking. Okay. What do we know about men? Their frontal lobe, which controls risk taking, develops much later than women. So
That's right.
They're much more susceptible to risk taking behavior. I don't know how many memes I've seen that says this is why women live longer than men, and it's a picture of two guys or three guys doing something that they have, setting a basketball on fire and then shooting it through the hoop to take a picture or whatever it is. So
Right.
number one's risk taking. Obviously, men are more susceptible to risk taking behavior. Gambling, in its very nature, is a risk taking behavior. If it wasn't risky, I guess the dopamine hit wouldn't be there. But the second thing is that men like sports more than women. And I'm not trying to be controversial in any way when I say this, but there's a reason why the WNBA has to be propped up by other leagues, even though they have great women's basketball players. And I'll tell you why. It's because women don't go. Women don't go to the games. If 50% of the population is women, if more women went to women's basketball, it would be just as big as, or whatever it is. Men just like sports better for whatever reason. They are more drawn to, and it could be some of that frontal lobe stuff that I just mentioned, but they're more drawn to sports. So naturally, they're going to be the people, because they're paying attention to sports, they're going to be the people who are more drawn to wagering on sports. Those are two that I can think of.
Yeah, I think you're right. Kurt. And I have a son and 3 daughters, so I see this played out. There's a reasons why health car insurance for young men is more expensive than it is for young women. Car insurance for my son is more expensive than car insurance for my daughters. Men are risk takers, and I think that's by design. I think God has wired in men. And again, we don't want to overgeneralize, right? There's variations, of course, and exceptions of the rule, but I think God has wired young men to be risk takers, to be builders, to be bold to do these things. Obviously, it has to be channeled in good ways, right? It can be channeled in foolhardy, stupid ways, and in good ways. And so men are ultra competitive that way, although women can be as well. And as you said, their frontal lobe is not fully developed till 25, so they're going to make a lot of mistakes and do a lot of foolish things. And I think there's just a particular pathology. If you look at the last several decades, our society has, whether consciously or subconsciously, almost targeted young men with crippling vices, whether it's the sexual revolution, pornography, marijuana, now gambling. Not to say women don't get caught up in these as well. They can. But primarily it's men. And look, a society that wants to cripple men by their own vices, Satan loves to do that, right? Because that destroys families and it destroys society. If the family is a basic building block of society, if you can cripple young men, you can really do a lot of damage. And so I think this is really important for us as we raise up young men to teach them what it is to be men of God who have a healthy masculinity and a healthy sense of risk-taking and boldness, but channeled in smart and good ways. These are actually vices that make men more passive. They make them less active. They dull their senses and really rob them of the sort of adventurous life God has called them to have.
Mm-hmm.
There's so many sobering things we're saying here, from just brain development and young boys. I mean, just families being destroyed, all sorts of issues associated with money. I mean, predatory type behaviors. Why isn't the church talking about this more? Why does it seem like this is kind of something that's still flying under the radar a little bit?
Mm, I, I have one. I'd love to hear what Daniel says, but I have one reason I think it doesn't get mentioned as much is because it's done in secret. All right. It's done in secret. When you have someone in your church who has an addiction problem, like alcohol or prescription drugs or harder drugs, whatever it is, that is going to show itself. It's a showy sin, right? If you have someone who's sinning, embezzling funds or has an affair or, all these things that can kind of, even if they're done secretly, that can kind of show themselves up. In order for your gambling problem to show up, it's got to get really bad. And I think sometimes people are able to cover up their gambling problem to a greater degree than they could maybe some other sins that they lose control of. They lose what anyone would consider a significant amount of money, but then that keeps them cool for a minute, and then it goes on, and eventually they get to the point where they lose. I hope that doesn't happen, but they lose a ton of money. But I would say that there is kind of a secretive nature to it, and where people don't really want to talk about it, or you're able to kind of do it without ever talking about it with anyone else.
Yeah, I think so. And I also just think there's just been a lot of moral teaching about this issue. It's kind of seen as an agree to disagree issue among Christians. And I also think among evangelicals, we rightly emphasize grace. We don't want to be legalistic. I grew up in a very, fundamentalist upbringing, and I'm thankful for most of learning the gospel, all that, but a significant amount of legalism where we made tertiary things primary. And so we, a lot of times we want to avoid that. We want to talk about grace. That I think that the pendulum is swung so far that we don't really talk about virtue and moral formation and the practices and habits that should shape and form us. And I think our people need to hear teaching on some of these issues. How should I feel about smoking marijuana? How should I feel about gambling? How should I feel about cohabitation and all these other things that I really think we need to get specific on it, and people are looking for answers
Mm.
to this thing. By the way, I do have a book, shameless plug, coming out this summer on some of these issues, how to think through these wisely and biblically, from B&H Publishers. But I think pastors have to talk about this, and we can do it in a way that's grace filled. We can talk and say, hey, if you have an issue and you've been wrestling, you can come and we'll get you help. We'll help you. We'll help you walk through this. But I also think we need to warn people that these are traps and snares that the Bible talks about that they would be wise to avoid.
Mm. You want to really stir the pot? I'm gonna make John nervous for a second. You want to really stir the pot, Daniel? You're talking about about virtue and about trying to hold up things to the people. It would be a very interesting and a different RYM podcast, I think, and maybe not even RYM podcast, to talk about dating apps in the same way as we talk about gambling apps. You talk about another somewhat gray area, but it would be, I think more and more I'm meeting in my ministry, I'm meeting young couples, and I love to ask them how they came together or how they met each other. And I'm more and more I'm hearing about some of these apps and 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 also some of the wreckage that is left behind on these apps as well. So that's probably for another discussion.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, that's a controversial issue, but I do think people need guidance and direction, and particularly on all these things. And if they're not going to hear it from the church, they're going to hear it from other places that are forming them, whether it's their podcasts or their influencers and all these kinds of things.
Well, I was going to say, I know we need to end it here. Maybe just one action item for people listening, a final word, something, just because we've said a whole lot. There's a lot where, I want to guard from somebody hearing this and just, freaking out and just not knowing what to do and throwing up their hands, hopelessness. What's maybe an action item that people can take, whether that's parents talking to their own children, churches, whatever that may be?
Yeah, I think if you're a parent, to have a conversation with your kids about these issues, and talk about these things, why we should really be wary of some of sports gambling. I think if you're a student pastor, I do think it'd be good to have a conversation, and obviously the format and the setting of your group better than I would. But how do we bring up, maybe doing a series on walking wisely and with wisdom, and don't just maybe bring up one issue like this, but bring up a range of issues, but really teach and say, this is what you need to be thinking through, and maybe read on some of the literature, some of the fallout from gambling, some of the statistics, just to kind of get a sense of the impact. But I think it'd be good to be proactive. And if you're a senior pastor, maybe this is something that you think through. How do we address it as a church?
I would say, well, one, Jesus directly tells us you can't serve two masters. You can't serve God and money. And also we're warned in the scriptures that the love of money is the root of all evil. One of the most misquoted texts in all of scripture. So there's clearly some warnings there to walk wisely in this. But I'd also say, just as a point of like pastoring, is, I'm going to be very careful here, but you were a bad bet. If you're a Christian, you were a bad bet, and Jesus redeemed you. You were a very bad bet. You were not a winner. You were a loser, and you had no hope. And I think that people who have fallen on their face in this realm, and there are many of them, that they need to hear that there's someone who can buy. I mean, redemption literally means to buy back, that there is someone who can buy them back from this. And, I'd hope that that's what our people hear in our context here, but I would hope that everyone who listens to this would hear, is that even if you're in a bad spot, with this. If you've driven it into the ditch, is what I used to tell my students. Even if you drive it into the ditch, that there is someone who can buy you back, and there is something greater than all the mess that you've made in this particular area. So
Yeah, that's really good.
Yeah, that's a good word to end on. Dan, Kurt, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Appreciate it. And thankful for the work you guys do here.
Thanks, Daniel. It's nice to meet you. It's our first time together, but it's really nice to meet you. And I also just wanted to say that I grew up coming home from school in Mississippi and watching WGN and listening to Harry Carey. So I'm a Cubs fan.
Praise the Lord.
Yeah. So there you go.
God
We
has-
have that in common. I don't root for the Bears. I don't root for the Blackhawks. I don't root for the Bulls. Even though Michael Jordan is the GOAT, but
right.
I do root for the Cubs. So we have that in common. It's really
Hey,
nice.
listen, God has his people everywhere. So
Wake up and break yourself out of here. Don't be one of the cold souls who disappear. Stop believing and telling the lie. Why don't you look your life in the eye?
Thanks for listening to the RYM podcast and this season of the Dopamine Delusion. Special thanks to the Arcadian Wild for the use of their song Dopamine, and to our editors Joe Deegan and Virginia Stroud. Be sure and check out the show notes for links, resources, or books mentioned in today's episode. If today's topic resonated with you, please take the time to share this episode with a friend who might find it beneficial. For more information about our student conferences, youth leader training, and other resources, be sure to visit rym.org. See you next week for another episode of the Dopamine Delusion.